Hello and welcome to the week one photo theme. The photo theme for this week is isolation. Throughout the next few weeks, we'll be taking at least one picture each week. The first one is designed to get us started in kind of documenting what's happening in this new world of isolation that we're living in right now. So we'll go through what that could mean for you and how to do a good job of it. The photo is due on Thursday night, and look for instructions on Google Classroom to figure out how to turn it in. What's due is at least one photo and a brief reflection on that photo and an explanation of what it means. Our worlds have gotten pretty small for most of us over the last few weeks, and so I thought this quote was fitting. See the world with new eyes every day. We can't change the world that we're living in right now, but we can change how we see it, and that's what we're going to try to do with this and other photo assignments over the next few weeks. So what can isolation mean? We're going to figure that out with this presentation, and how do we best show it? Let's figure that out. The first thing you need to make sure your photo has is a focal point. If we're dealing with isolation, I need to know what it is that's isolated. What should I be looking at? So ask yourself right away, what am I supposed to be looking at? The questions you can ask are, what is the central point of interest? What is the subject of my photo? What will draw the eye of the viewer of this picture? And what will this image stand out from others? What will make it stand out? So this image of the boat is obviously what you look at. It has a focal point. That's the point of interest. There's a nice sunset happening, and there's interesting clouds and very glassy, smooth water. But you didn't look at any of those other things first. You looked at the boat, so that photo has a focal point. On the other hand, this is a nice panorama, but it lacks a focal point. There's nothing that draws a person's eye initially, and there's no place for the eye to go once it's on the photograph. This photo is very simple, but it has a focal point. There's something to look at. You can't help but see it first, and it's right in the middle, so there's a focal point. It's a place for the eye to start, and this photo has it. So focal points don't have to be complicated. This one's fairly simple. The other way to work with a focal point is through the rule of thirds, which is probably something you're familiar with, but I need to review just in case you're not. To use the rule of thirds, you can set your phone or your camera to display a grid, and the grid can look something like this. This is what it looked like on an iPhone. Or, as you're taking a photo, just imagine the picture being cut into 9 smaller rectangles. Looks like that illustration. And what you're trying to do is place a focal point in one of the 4 intersections in the photo. We'll show you how that can look. Here's another photo. It's an interesting landscape without a focal point. So if you look at it right now, your eyes are probably just wandering from place to place with no real place to start or end on the photograph. This one's a little bit better because it has texture and depth. I mean, there's one mountain, a second layer of mountains, and then that third background layer of mountains. So it does have things to look at. Then you could glance at the cactuses and the landscape. But overall, it's only okay with focal point. Nice straight horizon line though. This one does a little bit better, still has the texture, but it has a foreground and a path that you follow into the background, and you see this other layer. So that's getting better. And then this one tries a focal point so that you have a cactus to look at first and then the background. The problem with this photo is aperture. Everything is in focus, and so nothing is in focus. So here's a way that you could use isolation and focal points and rule of thirds all together. So now I get to see the cactus first. I get to see the detail of the cactus, and then I get to notice the setting in the background. So I started and then I went here. So the isolation is happening, but there's also context. You can even get closer. So now I've isolated the details of the cactus further from the background, and it's 1/3 of the photo is cactus and 2/3 is background. Here's rule of thirds. We've got about a third of it dedicated to this hill. A bottom third is ground, and then the top 2/3 over here is sky, and they all kind of play together. Now we're looking at rule of thirds and focal point again. We have one thing. So the isolation is this flower, or maybe these two flowers. And then you notice the background. So the first third is this, and then 2/3 is the background. But the point is with this, with the focal point is you have one point to look at. And then you can notice things after that. You can also do isolation and focal points with aperture, which means the contrast between the background and the foreground of a photo. So in this one, you've got a blurry mountain and crisp flowers. You can also do it the reverse. You've got a crisp mountain that you start on, and then you go to the blurry photos. So you can play with focus and aperture to do that. Here's another way to do it. So rule of thirds, I put this orange right in the center third of the photo. There's my son on the other side. We have a tradition every time we climb a mountain, we eat oranges, and it's really refreshing and it's good. So I wanted to highlight that tradition. So the orange is in focus, my son is blurred, and you notice where you look at first, and then your eyes go from there. But you know exactly what your viewer is going to be looking at first. Another thing you can do is take a look at objects you can place to show a focal point or isolation. This was a nice mountain pond, but with a focal point, it can tell a story. So there's my shoes and socks. You can get from this picture that I was in this water, at least wading in that water recently, or I'm about to go in the water. By having a focal point, you turn a landscape into a story. Again, nice landscape, but with a focal point, it tells a story. I'm there with my son. He's looking at the water. His feet are wet. You can see how this environment was interacted with. Continuing quickly, placing a focal point in your photo can give it context. So putting my son in 1/3 of the photo, having him look toward the empty 2/3 gives the photo context. Can do that again with the trail. He's in 1/3 right there. Okay, so before you go out and do it, I'll show you. I had my sons do this assignment. One of them is 12, one of them is 14. You can see the way that they showed isolation in their photo assignments. My 12-year-old will go first. This is using rule of thirds and aperture. This is another one where he wanted to show isolation. So he's using some different layering by taking a picture of a reflection inside of an empty barbershop. He's showing himself isolated. He's using rule of thirds by placing himself in that center third, which is sometimes risky, but he does it well. And then he's the one person in the photo to show isolation. Then my older son did it by taking a picture of these berries and this stick. So it's in focus, but the lake is out of focus. What you're going to do this week is give this a try. You're going to take one photo at least. Feel free to set it up to illustrate isolation and what it means to you, especially this week. And then look for instructions on Google Classroom about how to turn that in with a brief reflection. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out. And I can't wait to see what your photos look like. Thank you.